In the early hours of November 22nd, 1990, the sea off the west coast of Scotland was quiet. The waters near the Firth of Clyde, normally restless and grey, were calm beneath a heavy sky. For the small fishing vessel FV Antares, it was supposed to be another night of hard work and routine. The Antares was a trawler, 45 feet long, crewed by 4 men who knew the sea better than most. They were local fishermen from Carradale, an old coastal village where fishing was more than just a job. It was a way of life passed down through generations. The men aboard the Antares were experienced, disciplined, and trusted each other completely. They had been fishing these waters for years, chasing shoals of herring, setting nets, pulling them in through cold winds and long nights. Nothing about that night seemed unusual. At around 2 in the morning, the Antares was drifting quietly with its trawl gear extended beneath the surface, large steel cables stretching hundreds of meters into the dark. They were fishing near the Isle of Arran, a known spot for good catches and calm waters. Far to the south, the Royal Navy submarine HMS Trenchant was conducting routine exercises, a training mission that, officially, was not meant to interfere with civilian vessels. The crew of the Trenchant had no idea that fishermen were nearby, and the fishermen, of course, had no reason to think that a nuclear-powered submarine was moving silently beneath them. The sea can be deceiving. It looks vast and empty, but below the surface it's crowded, with cables, nets, and machines moving through layers of current. That night, 2 very different worlds, one of tradition, one of technology, were about to collide in a way no one could have imagined. At around 3 a.m., the Antares' captain, 33-year-old skipper James Russell, was at the helm. He was calm, confident, and focused on his radar screen. The rest of the crew, Dougie, Billy, and Jamie, were checking equipment, chatting quietly, and preparing to haul the nets soon. They had no warning, no signal, no sound. Beneath them, moving through the black water, the HMS Trenchant was rising. The submarine's sonar did not detect any vessels nearby. According to its instruments, the surface was clear. The commander ordered the sub to ascend. Slowly, carefully, a normal maneuver in training. But there was something directly above them that the radar had missed. The trawl cables of the Antares. They were hanging like invisible wires in the deep, heavy with fishing gear. As the Trenchant rose, its fin, the upper sail structure, caught the Antares' cables. For a split second, there was resistance, then tension, then disaster. The submarine's upward motion pulled the trawler backward and down. The Antares was dragged violently toward the sea. The crew had no time to react, no chance to send a distress call. Within seconds, the vessel flipped stern first into the water and vanished. Above the waves, there was only darkness again. The sea closed over the spot, as if nothing had happened. Down below, the Trenchant continued its maneuver, unaware of the destruction it had caused. Inside the submarine, some crew members reported a strange jolt, something unexpected, but not enough to raise immediate alarm. They would only discover the truth hours later. By sunrise, the Antares had not returned to port. Families in Carradale began to worry. Calls went unanswered. Boats were sent out to look for the missing trawler. And soon, floating debris, bits of wood and fishing gear, began to appear on the water. By mid-morning, the fear had turned into certainty. Something terrible had happened at sea. No one yet knew how or why. But one thing was clear. The Antares and her 4 crewmen were gone. By the time the sun rose over the horizon that morning, a sense of dread hung heavy in Carradale. Families gathered at the harbour, scanning the grey waters for any sign of the Antares. Fishermen in nearby boats tried to raise her on the radio. They shouted her name over the static, waited for an answer that never came. Silence answered back. Authorities were alerted, and the Coast Guard immediately mobilised search teams. Helicopters skimmed the waves, their spotlights cutting through the mist. Rescue vessels combed the area, scanning every inch of water near the Isle of Arran. All they found were small, scattered fragments. A lifebuoy marked Antares, a twisted plank of wood, and pieces of fishing gear floating gently in the cold Atlantic. The community watched helplessly as hours passed with no sign of the vessel or her crew. Every hour that went by intensified the fear that this was not a simple accident, not a minor mishap that could be corrected. The Antares had disappeared, leaving behind only questions and grief. Meanwhile, aboard the HMS Trenchant, the crew were slowly piecing together what had happened. Earlier, Some officers had noticed an unusual vibration, a sudden resistance in the submarine's ascent. At the time, it had been dismissed as contact with the seabed, a common occurrence in the shallow coastal waters. No one aboard suspected they had struck a trawler. The realization came hours later, as reports from the Coast Guard reached Naval Command. A fishing vessel was missing, her crew unaccounted for. The area had been recently patrolled by the Trenchant. Pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place, but the full scope of the tragedy was only revealed after divers descended to the wreck. The wreck of the Antares was located roughly 8 kilometers off the coast of Arran, resting at a depth of about 140 feet. The trawler lay upside down on the seabed, her hull battered, nets still attached, a silent testament to the violent forces that had pulled her under. Inside, the 4 crew members had perished: Captain William McNeely, his son Charles, John McNeil, and Dougie Craig, all lost. For the community of Carradale, the shock was immense. 4 men, experienced and careful, taken not by a storm, not by inexperience, but by a collision that no one had anticipated. The sea, calm that night, had become an unforgiving grave. Questions arose immediately. How could a fishing vessel vanish without warning? Why was a submarine operating in such proximity to civilian vessels? Had there been a communication failure? Or was this a tragic oversight, a lapse in judgment by the Navy? Naval authorities initially responded cautiously, providing minimal information. Press statements suggested that no submarines were in the area, a claim that only deepened the anxiety and suspicion among the fishermen. But those familiar with the waters knew the truth. Submarines were not uncommon in these channels, often conducting exercises with little notice to local crews. Over the following days, evidence began to paint a clearer picture. The wreckage of the Antares showed clear signs of entanglement. Her trawl cables had been pulled taut, leading directly toward the path taken by the submarine. Metal and paint transferred from the sub's hull were discovered on the damaged parts of the trawler, confirming what the community feared. A collision with HMS Trenchant had caused the loss of the vessel. Public outrage began to grow. 4 lives had been lost, and the families demanded answers. Why had no warning been issued? Why had the submarine not surfaced more carefully? Why had the Navy remained silent in those first critical hours? The tragedy sparked not only grief but a determination to uncover the truth. It became a catalyst for investigation, a turning point that would expose the dangers of naval exercises in fishing areas and force new protocols to prevent such accidents in the future. The discovery of the Antares' wreck marked the beginning of accountability. It was proof of what had happened, a stark and unchangeable record on the seabed. For those left behind, it was a source of sorrow, a reminder that the sea, even in calm, could harbor unseen threats, especially when powerful machinery moved silently beneath the surface. As inquiries began and stories spread, the Antares disaster became more than an isolated accident. It was a story of human error, of systems failing to protect lives, and of the collision between tradition and technology. Fishermen and submarines sharing the same waters, with deadly consequences. The Antares was gone, but her story had only just begun to be told. The search and discovery had confirmed the tragedy, but it also set the stage for questions of responsibility, transparency, and the urgent need to prevent such a disaster from happening again. Once the wreck of the FV Antares was confirmed, the scale of the tragedy became undeniable. 4 lives lost, a community in mourning, and a Royal Navy submarine, HMS Trenchant, at the center of it all. The initial response from naval authorities was cautious, almost evasive. Statements released to the press denied that any submarine had been in the area at the time of the disappearance. They suggested that the trawler might have sunk due to natural causes, equipment failure, or bad weather. For the families of William McNeely, his son Charles, and crewmen John McNeil and Dougie Craig, such claims were unacceptable. They knew the waters, they knew the sea was calm, and they knew the Antares had not sent any distress signals. The pressure from the community, local media, and politicians forced the Ministry of Defense to acknowledge the truth. HMS Trenchant had been operating in the area. The submarine had been conducting training exercises near periscope depth at the very time the Antares disappeared. This admission shocked many. A nuclear-powered vessel, unseen beneath the surface, had collided with a civilian fishing boat. A formal board of inquiry was convened in 1991 to investigate the incident. Its mandate was clear: determine what went wrong, identify accountability, and recommend measures to prevent similar tragedies. The inquiry revealed a series of critical failures. The sonar crew aboard Trenchant had not detected the trawler or its trailing nets. Small wooden vessels are notoriously difficult for submarine sonar to detect, but the procedures for surface checks were not followed rigorously. The officer of the watch had relied on incomplete visual observations through the periscope. Crucial safety protocols designed to ensure that the submarine did not surface near civilian traffic had been ignored. The commander of HMS Trenchant accepted responsibility, acknowledging that the ascent had been conducted without proper checks. Although no criminal charges were filed, formal reprimands were issued, and several officers faced career consequences. For the families of the Antares crew, the inquiry's findings brought mixed emotions. Accountability had been acknowledged, but it could never bring back William, Charles, John, or Dougie. The inquiry confirmed that the disaster was not caused by nature, equipment failure, or misfortune. It was a preventable tragedy caused by human error, oversight, and lapses in communication. The public scrutiny also revealed a broader issue. Reports from local fishermen indicated that encounters with submarines were not uncommon. Over the previous decade, dozens of incidents had been logged in, which trawl nets were snagged or vessels were endangered. Yet many of these incidents went unreported or unaddressed. The Antares disaster highlighted the lethal consequences of such systemic negligence. As the investigation continued, recommendations were made. The Royal Navy implemented stricter protocols for operations near civilian areas, including improved sonar procedures, mandatory surface checks, and communication channels with fishing communities. New reporting requirements ensured that any near misses were documented and risk zones were clearly identified. Despite these reforms, the scars of the disaster remained. The incident exposed the fragile balance between military operations and civilian life at sea. It underscored a stark reality. Advanced technology, if mismanaged or unchecked, can have devastating consequences for those who share the same waters. The inquiry also emphasized lessons beyond the military. Coastal communities were reminded of the importance of vigilance, situational awareness, and the need for constant dialogue with naval authorities. For generations of fishermen, the sea was no longer just a place of livelihood and tradition. It was a place where invisible risks lurked beneath calm surfaces. The story of the Antares, revealed through the investigation, became a case study in maritime safety, human error, and accountability. It was cited in naval training, regulatory reforms, and safety campaigns across the UK. But for those who lost loved ones that November night, it was a painful reminder that systemic flaws and oversights can have irreversible consequences. The Antares disaster had proven one undeniable truth: the sea is impartial, but human error is fatal. It is not the waves that always claim lives, but the failures we bring with us into the water. The tragedy of the FV Antares sent shockwaves through Scotland and the wider maritime community. 4 men had lost their lives, their families left grappling with grief, anger, and unanswered questions. But beyond sorrow, the disaster sparked a critical examination of naval practices and maritime safety. The Royal Navy faced pressure not only to explain the incident, but also to prevent it from ever happening again. Their response involved a comprehensive review of procedures for submarine operations near civilian shipping lanes. New protocols were introduced, emphasizing communication, coordination, and heightened vigilance. One of the most significant reforms was the creation of a notification system for fishing communities. Under this system, the Navy would provide advance warning when submarines were conducting exercises in areas frequented by civilian vessels. Fishermen were also given access to direct reporting channels, allowing them to alert naval authorities if they spotted suspicious or potentially dangerous activity. Onboard submarines, training procedures were overhauled. Sonar operators received additional instruction on detecting small wooden vessels. Periscope watches were reinforced, and checklists were expanded to include multiple redundant checks before surfacing. These measures were designed to ensure that no submarine could rise without being aware of nearby surface traffic. The incident also prompted broader discussions about accountability. The Antares disaster revealed a recurring problem. Near misses between submarines and fishing vessels were far more common than the public realized. For years, Many incidents went unreported or were quietly dismissed. The Navy recognized that transparency and oversight were essential not only to protect lives, but also to maintain trust with coastal communities. Beyond the Navy, local authorities and safety organizations used the disaster as a learning opportunity. Maritime safety campaigns were launched along the Scottish coast. Fishermen were educated on submarine safety zones, and guidance was provided on how to respond to potential encounters with submerged military vessels. The legacy of the Antares extended into legislative reforms. New regulations mandated clearer communication between military and civilian operations in shared waters. The tragic loss of the 4 crewmen became the catalyst for a safer, more accountable approach to maritime operations. Yet, even as protocols were implemented, the human impact remained profound. Families who had lost fathers, sons, and brothers continued to struggle with grief. The small fishing community of Carradale mourned collectively, understanding that no regulation or policy could replace the lives that had been lost. The Antares disaster also served as a stark reminder of the delicate balance between progress and safety. Naval innovation, technology, and exercises are essential for national security. But when these activities intersect with civilian life, particularly in unpredictable coastal waters, vigilance and care become a moral imperative. By the mid-1990s, the Royal Navy had established a program known as Submarine Aware, designed specifically to prevent incidents like the Antares tragedy. This initiative included better coordination with local maritime authorities, public notifications of exercises, and stricter monitoring of submarine maneuvers near fishing zones. It was a direct response to the catastrophe, a legacy born from tragedy. In Carradale, the memorial to the Antares crew stands as a symbol of both loss and learning. It reminds all who pass of the lives that were taken and the reforms that arose in their name. The tragedy reshaped the relationship between the Navy and the fishing community, creating a culture of communication, caution, and respect for the sea and those who work upon it. The disaster also became a touchstone in maritime safety discussions worldwide. It illustrated the deadly consequences of lapses in procedure, the need for transparency in military operations, and the importance of protecting those whose livelihoods depend on the ocean. The lessons of the FV Antares continue to resonate decades later. They are a reminder that while technology can advance, human oversight and accountability remain crucial. For the Navy, the fishing community, and maritime regulators, the Antares disaster became more than a story of loss. It became a lesson in responsibility, vigilance, and the urgent need to safeguard lives at sea. The FV Antares tragedy left an indelible mark on Carradale and the wider Scottish coastal communities. 4 men were gone, but their memory became a guiding force for change, remembrance, and reflection. In the weeks following the disaster, the families of William McNeely, his son Charles, and crewmen John McNeil and Dougie Craig mourned deeply. The village, tightly knit and dependent on the sea, came together in shared grief. The community organised vigils and memorials, placing flowers and personal tributes along the docks where the trawler had once set out to work. The sorrow was raw, but so too was the sense of solidarity. Everyone knew that these men represented not just lives lost, but the risks inherent to fishing along the North Channel. The Royal Navy maintained its commitment to reform, emphasising that lessons had been learned from the disaster. Submarine Aware, the programme initiated after the tragedy, improved coordination between naval operations and civilian activity. Training protocols were refined, communication strengthened, and public awareness campaigns launched along Scotland's coasts. In part, these measures were intended to ensure that the loss of the Antares would not be repeated, that the sacrifice of those 4 men would not be in vain. Yet memorials and programmes, while meaningful, could never replace the lives taken. In Carradale, a permanent stone monument was erected overlooking the waters of the Firth of Clyde. The names of the crew, William McNeely, Charles McNeely, John McNeil, and Dougie Craig, were etched in granite facing the horizon. Fishermen passing by would often pause, silently acknowledging the risk and respect owed to those who venture into the ocean. The Antares disaster also became a broader lesson in maritime culture. It highlighted the tension between military necessity and civilian safety, showing that advanced technology can inadvertently endanger lives if vigilance lapses. For policymakers, the tragedy served as a wake-up call. It prompted more rigorous safety regulations, closer oversight of naval exercises, and stricter reporting requirements for near misses and accidents at sea. Families, too, became advocates for change. They spoke publicly about the importance of accountability, demanding ongoing awareness from both the Navy and local authorities. Their voices helped ensure that safety procedures were not only implemented, but enforced, and that the risk to small fishing vessels would remain a priority. The Antares also entered the broader maritime consciousness. It became a case study in training programs for the Royal Navy and in maritime safety courses across the United Kingdom. The story illustrated the catastrophic consequences of human error and procedural failure, emphasizing that no vessel, regardless of size, is immune from disaster. For the men of Carradale and other fishing communities, the sea remains a livelihood, a tradition, and a challenge. Every cast of the net, every boat launched, carries the memory of those lost aboard the Antares. And while the ocean can be forgiving, it is also indifferent, a reminder that vigilance, caution, and respect are not optional but essential. Even decades later, the story is told and retold. In schools, in maritime lectures, and within fishing families, the Antares disaster is recounted as a lesson in accountability and the importance of safeguarding lives at sea. It is a testament to the power of remembrance and the enduring impact of tragedy. Ultimately, the FV Antares is more than a sunken vessel. She represents lives lived with dedication, the vulnerability of human endeavors at sea, and the profound responsibility of those whose technology and actions intersect with civilian life. Through memorials, reforms, and stories, the legacy of the Antares continues to shape maritime safety, ensuring that her crew is never forgotten. The FV Antares tragedy remains a powerful reminder of the delicate balance between human ambition, technology, and the unpredictable sea. 4 men lost their lives that November night, and a small Scottish fishing community was left forever changed. But from this disaster came lessons that resonate to this day. Lessons about responsibility, vigilance, and the human cost of oversight. The Royal Navy, in the aftermath, implemented significant reforms. Submarine Aware became a cornerstone of submarine operations, ensuring that civilian vessels were notified of nearby exercises. Sonar and periscope protocols were strengthened, and redundant safety checks were enforced to prevent similar accidents. Fishermen, in turn, became more aware of the risks posed by submerged vessels and were equipped with better communication channels to report incidents. Beyond regulations, the Antares disaster forced a cultural shift. It revealed the tension between military secrecy and civilian safety, and highlighted the consequences when that balance is ignored. It showed that even the most advanced technology can cause devastation if human oversight fails. Memorials and remembrance events keep the memory of the Antares crew alive. Every year, the families of William McNeely, Charles McNeely, John McNeil, and Dougie Craig gather to honour their lives, sharing stories of courage, dedication, and love for the sea. Their legacy lives on not only in monuments and ceremonies, but in every safety protocol designed to prevent another tragedy. The Antares disaster also serves as a cautionary tale for all who venture onto the water. The sea is impartial. It does not discriminate between those who respect it and those who underestimate it. Yet human choices, preparation, and awareness can make the difference between survival and catastrophe. Every vessel, from the smallest trawler to the largest warship, shares a responsibility to navigate the oceans with care and foresight. For communities along Scotland's coast, and indeed for maritime communities worldwide, the Antares story is both a warning and a lesson. It reminds us that safety is not guaranteed by skill alone, nor by technology. It requires vigilance, communication, and a culture of accountability. Decades after the incident, the waters off Arran remain peaceful. The waves carry on their timeless rhythm, but beneath the surface, the story of the Antares endures. It is remembered in training programs, in maritime safety legislation, and in the hearts of those whose lives it touched. It is a story of tragedy, of loss, and of the enduring importance of responsibility at sea. The Antares may never sail again, but her story lives on, shaping policy, teaching lessons, and reminding us that every life lost at sea carries a message for the future. If you found this story meaningful, take a moment to honor the lives of William, Charles, John, and Dougie by subscribing for more real-life maritime stories, historical lessons, and extraordinary tales from the edge of human experience. Share this story with others so the lessons of the Antares disaster are never forgotten. And let's ensure that safety, awareness, and respect for the sea remain at the forefront of every journey.